Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone still trickling in. Welcome to Grant Writing, a conversation with recipients. We've brought our panelists together today because each of them has successfully applied for major funding sources, go them, that support graduate research, including represented among our panelists include fellowships like the MA's Brigitte Baldwin Fellowship, the Shalick Fellowship, the Beinecke the Beinecke Book and Manuscript Library Fellowship, as well as I believe a Fulbright too, but I might be making that up, and I'm sure many others that we don't have time to name. But during this event, our panelists will share their own experiences applying for these grants and fellowships, and will reflect on how these funding opportunities have shaped their work and their own professional development. This conversation builds on a previous GSC workshop, actually, that took place in February of 2022. That workshop featured a panel of more established scholars, I think it's fair to say, that were sharing their advice on practical aspects of applying for grants, and they offered their perspectives as regular evaluators of such sources of funding. So we thought it'd be great to bring a group of younger scholars together who can reflect on their experience as applicants and, of course, as recipients. I'll share the link to that previous workshop in the chat shortly, but you can also find it on the MAA's YouTube page. Before we get started, I am going to turn things over to our current GSC chair, Will Beatty, who is going to share with you all some information about other GSC goings-on. So take it away, Will.
Thanks very much, Lauren, and hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Will Beatty, and as the current and outgoing chair of the Graduate Student Committee, soon to be replaced by the great Lauren Lee herself, I want to warmly welcome you all to this workshop. So this session on grant writing is our third workshop this academic year. We've held sessions on organizing your research, on tips for accessing libraries and archives, and in January, we also held our second Digital Humanities Showcase. Most of these workshops and the showcase itself are available on the Medieval Academy's YouTube page, as are workshops and sessions from previous years. We also want to be able to provide resources that benefit graduates, so if there are topics that you would like to see covered, please do let us know, and keep an eye on your emails for updates regarding any future events. We also have a couple of other projects we'd like to share with you quickly. The GSC is working with other committees in the Medieval Academy, including the Committee on Centres and Regional Associations, or CARA, to learn more about the skills and languages that graduate students need and what training they do and don't have access to. Our goal is ultimately to provide opportunities for training in skills and languages that are difficult for graduates to access, whether that's because of geographical, financial, scheduling reasons, or anything else. So to do so, we're in the process of gathering data. We've created a preliminary questionnaire, and if you have the time, we'd be really grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete it and share your thoughts with us. You can find more information about that questionnaire in our latest newsletter. We'll be posting about it on social media, and of course, I'll put the links in the chat once we move on to the next section. We also have another question on mentoring so that we can both improve our own mentoring programs and develop resources for senior academics to help them to develop their own mentoring practices. And again, you can find information for that in the latest newsletter. It will be on social media, and I'll put the link in the chat. Aside from that, I want to let you know that the GSC members will be running a social at Kalamazoo, and we're also hosting panels at Kalamazoo and Leeds this year. And as I mentioned, we run mentoring programs, matching students with scholars at the conferences. You can find information about many of these things through the MAA emails, through social media. As always, you can reach out to us directly to learn more. So if you're attending any of the conferences, please do come and check out these different events. The podcast, The Multicultural Middle Ages, is now in its third season. It has grown beyond the GSC, is now its own sort of entity within the MAA, but it continues to promote the work of graduate students. The call for submissions is concluded for this season, but if you have an idea for an episode, then please do keep an eye out for the next call for submissions and go and listen to the latest episodes. And finally, please feel free to get in touch with us. We'd like to use our newsletter to highlight graduate student projects, bring attention to major conferences, grant deadlines, and if you feel like we're missing something, we'd really like to know. You can contact us via social media or via the email address gsc@themedievalacademy.org. And again, I'll put that email address in the chat. So I'll put those links to the surveys in the chat now, and that's all from me. Over to you, Maggie. Thanks very much.
Right. Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Heeshen. I'm a co-organizer with Lauren and an outgoing GSC member. So very quickly, I just want to run through the schedule for today so we're all on the same page. So first, we'll hear from each of our four presenters, and they'll talk for about 5 to 8 minutes. We'll give a brief bio of them, and they'll talk a little bit about their award and just their experience with it. Then we'll move into a conversation about 20 minutes of the panelists just sort of talking to each other and getting to share some of their ideas. And then after that, we'll open the Q&A to the audience. And I believe for this kind of webinar, I think all the questions need to be typed in. So if you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A box whenever during this. Just know that we won't start calling on your questions until we get to that third section, the open Q&A at the end. So with that, I will turn it back over to Lauren, who will introduce our first presenter.
Excellent. Okay, so our first panelist is Carolin Gluchowski. So Carolin has studied art history and medieval and Renaissance studies at the University of Freiburg in Germany. She is currently reading for a PhD in medieval and modern languages at the University of Oxford in the UK. Her PhD project, entitled Revising Private Prayer Books, the Latin Low German prayer books from the Cistercian convent of Meddingen in the context of late medieval and church reforms, end quote, explores the reworkings of the Latin/Low German prayer books from the Cistercian convent of Meddingen, which I think I'm butchering horribly, but this project aims to contribute to a more nuanced understanding of the role of women in late medieval church reforms. Take it away, Carolin.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the kind invitation and for having me. So you've already learned I'm a German scholar currently based in the UK. And the first thing is that before I went to the UK, I studied in Freiburg, which was actually based in a very different academic environment. Grant writing for people under the senior level wasn't really a thing and was considered to be highly unusual. So when I moved to the UK and also became part of the Oxford research environment, this was something I had to adjust for and also had to find my way in learning how to do it, because when you're not part of this grant writing community, you don't really know how it works. So my first advice would be talk to your researcher and your supervisor, senior supervisor, about grant writing and what kind of grants actually would make sense for your project. This doesn't actually always mean that you and your supervisor are on the same page or have the same ideas about what kind of grants or research trip might benefit you. But I think the conversation is noteworthy. How I found the grants I was applying to was actually due to mailing lists. So in the UK, it's very common that you can subscribe to mailing lists for different academic levels. And one of them is especially dedicated to postdocs. And they continually send you suggestions what grants you could apply for and how they could benefit your project. And from this, I learned much about how actually grants were distributed and how you can apply for them. I also have to admit that some of the awards I gained, I was encouraged to apply for by academics I already knew. So, for example, I was invited by the Cluster of Excellence at the University of Hamburg to submit an application. And I was also helped in the application writing process by one of the senior researchers based at the cluster. So here, networking is one of the crucial points. Get to know the people in your field and also just contact people who might be of interest to your research. I have to say I'm a German, and when I came, for example, to the Beinecke Library at Yale University for my research fellowship there, I kind of underestimated how much time admin stuff would cost. So applying for a visa, getting settled, getting payments, because Germans don't necessarily receive checks anymore. So how is this actually be done over national borders? And this can take up to 2 to 6 months in order to get this settled. So you have to consider all these things way in advance. Other thing is loneliness. So I've spent 6 months, for example, at the Herzog August Library in Wolfenbüttel. And maybe some of you have already been to Wolfenbüttel. It's a very small, remote town in Germany, having around 20,000 citizens. You cannot do anything there. There are no restaurants, no cafes, just a big library. And although the library is fascinating and the manuscripts are even better, you're away from your family and your friends, and you have to find ways of connecting with scholars around you in order not to feel lonely. And this can sometimes be very, very hard, at least from my experience. So be prepared, be open about attending lots of different sessions at the institution you're applying for, getting to know other people at private events, and just get a bit out of your comfort zone. When it comes to grant applications, one of the major points I felt are most beneficial to the application is being as precise as possible. When, for example, I applied to the British Academy last year for a postdoc fellowship, I applied with a proposal which were almost to a point where I could name the different journals I want to publish my papers as part of the postdoc projects. Also contacted already the publishing house I want to publish the outcome and proceedings of my postdoc project. So this really helped me to make a strong point in the application process itself. And maybe the last thing is rejection is normal, although you always fear that high achieving scholars always gets the grants they want. That may be true for some, but that's not true for all of us. And it's just a normal part of the process. And first of all, or when I started writing grants, I took it quite personal when a proposal was rejected, also considering you sometimes spend several months writing the proposal. But I learned that you in most cases have the chance to resubmit, and really should learn from the feedback you got and try to strengthen the proposal and not feel disencouraged, because a lot of time is going into these applications and they shouldn't just vanish. You just have to make something out of it, be it either as part of a resubmission or turning it into a journal article or something like that. So that would be the first insights from me, actually.
All right, thank you very much, Carolin. So up next, we will hear from Amy Juarez. Amy is a PhD candidate in the Department of English at the University of California, Riverside. Her research and teaching focus on medieval and early modern literature, visual art, and conceptions of embodiment, and her dissertation, titled The Poetics of Embodied Architecture in Medieval and Early Modern Europe, is supported by the Medieval Academy of America's Shalek Dissertation Fellowship. Her work has also been supported by the Richard III Society, I'm guessing that's what the 3 R's are, so sorry, the International Center of Medieval Art, the National Humanities Center, and the Center for Ideas and Society at Riverside. She's also co-director of the speaker series Race and the Pre-Modern Period at Riverside. So, welcome, Amy.
Thanks so much, Maggie. I actually have a couple of slides, so I'm going to share my screen. I probably have too many slides, so I won't go through all of them. Just give me a second here. Okay. And let me get to Canva. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as mentioned, I'm the Shalek Fellow. This past year was when I was awarded the fellowship, and before that though, and this is sort of what I'm going to talk about today, I participated in the MAA's grant writing cohort for the summer research program, and that really taught me a lot of skills and sort of the basics and ins and outs of how to even approach grant writing. So I want to talk about really all the things I learned, and the MAA is not telling me to talk about this. It just really was a really phenomenal experience for me. So I want to sort of start with the basics of how you even find grants, because for me, when I first thought, how am I going to get my work supported post-exam, in my program, I only had a year of funding post becoming a PhD candidate. So I needed to find additional external support in order to, facilitate and support my project as I went on the job market the following year. And so one of the things that I went into the MAA Summer Research Program asking was, how do I even find grants? How do I find large sums of money to support this really niche work? And sort of like you were mentioning, Carolyn, listservs was one that was really helpful for me. Signing up for as many as possible without feeling like it was too overbearing and overwhelming to get those emails every day with opportunities was really useful. Asking colleagues and mentors and friends, which I know you also talked about, Carolyn, forwarding opportunities amongst communities at my own institution, but also networking with other folks and, people, staying in contact with people at like conferences and saying, oh, I saw this grant opportunity, and having it forwarded, to me, and me doing the same for other people, I think was really useful. Of course, the summer research program, I'll plug that. It was really, really helpful. But then I think maybe the sort of meat and potatoes of the grant finding experience is looking for these sort of larger institutions, the MAA, ICMA, Mellon, Ford, NEH. UCLA has a really comprehensive list. I highly recommend searching there, not just for obviously like pre-modern, medieval, and early modern studies, but for grants just sort of largely across the humanities and social sciences. Individual institutions, so Riverside has a couple that are awarded to students, but also visiting scholars, and then centers and institutes and institutions sort of across. I applied for only domestic US fellowships just because I'm married and I have a life that I needed to sort of have here, and I wasn't, able to sort of make international moves. But there's lots of, various institutes that you can seek out support from if you go to their websites. I also just want to say one thing I learned when I was looking for grants was it's okay to look for opportunities that don't feel like they fit perfectly. I think what held me back in the early stages of grant writing and fellowship and searching for fellowships was feeling like I could only really apply for these few very particular medieval architecture centered grants that had to do with my dissertation. And there's actually, if you open the sort of doors to the larger world of fellowships, there's a lot of opportunities that can be, maybe not the perfect fit, but can really give you the support you're needing in terms of supporting your research and giving you time off of teaching, whatever it might be. Fit is complicated, I think. Obviously, it's good to have right fit, but it can also maybe hold us back sometimes. And then I just want to talk really briefly about my approach to grant writing. So like finding grants was like the first hurdle I had to sort of overcome. And then, actually having to write a grant and an application and sell your work in this way. It's a really interesting genre that I don't feel like in my program specifically, and this is not me bashing on my program at all. I love UCR. But, we don't have like the particular resources to be able to sit down and give students, step-by-step basics of how to approach this genre. And so what I was taught in the MAA Summer Research Program was to find a sample grant that you want to apply for and sort of go through a mock process. And so I drafted an application based on a model for the NEH application because I really liked the organization and the layout of the grant. It had different steps where you had to draft up a plan of completion, what methods you're going to use, what's the significance, what's the timeline. And that really sort of materialized how I was, conceptualizing my project and really gave me a sort of base model for the actual applications that I was putting out. I could sort of just refine this sample grant. And it also put less pressure on myself because I wasn't really actually submitting this application. It was just, this mock thing that I could use to sort of revise and refine. And then I got feedback from folks inside and outside of my field. And that was really a useful way in which I developed the application. I'm going to skip the next slide because it's just tips and go more to my personal takeaways. And then this is my last slide. A couple of things I learned in the sort of whole process The first one is establishing a rhythm of writing, and finding when you are most productive and really giving yourself the space within that period of time to write. Because, in specific, my brain works best from like 2 to 6, the most random time of day. But I found that I'm able to at least meet my writing goal if I allot that time 5 days a week, to really, honing in, researching, getting words on paper. And having that rhythm really actually helped me to get the work done, because it's a really sort of isolated, self-motivated process. You don't really have somebody holding expectations to you. You have to be independently sort of motivated to get the job done. Planning ahead and making a timeline, that was really useful. Some of the Schleck didn't actually have a timeline required with the application, but other fellowships I applied to did. And so even just drafting that and having it for the Schleck, and following that pretty strictly has been really useful for me. And I'm the kind of person that needs accountability. So I shared it with my committee, and they have kept me to the deadlines and dates that I set for myself. So that was really useful. Carolin, I think you also spoke about this, which I think is an interesting point to bring up. Being on fellowship is isolating, which of course it's really helpful in terms of having sustained time and attention to work on the thing that you need to do. But it is really isolating in terms of like not having the rigor and the connection and the kind of discussion that you might be used to when you're in a sort of, more like you're in a setting where you're not like isolated writing and researching. Also too, these are just 2 random things, but I think this was really shocking to me. The money and the funds can come in large sums. So for me in specific, the Schleck came in 2 installments. And so I really I love to create Excel sheets. So I created an Excel sheet to sort of pay myself out based on the funds that I was receiving, just because, it can feel enticing in some ways to receive, a large portion of this money all at once, but you have to realize it needs to be budgeted appropriately. And that was something I didn't really expect to have to manage on fellowship. And then lastly, being okay with unexpected circumstances, finds, or ideas. So just a sort of personal anecdote, I had a pretty severe health scare at the very beginning of my fellowship period. I had a blood clot and 4 surgeries. I'm okay. But it really set back my whole plans. I had planned to travel, but I couldn't go on planes because of my health condition, and visit the sort of manuscripts in the archives to look at these primary materials. And then the British Library had the cyber attack, so I couldn't look at the actual manuscripts I needed online either. But having that experience and finding new ways and innovative ways to, look at potentially like somebody random online had a couple of pictures of this manuscript that I needed to look at, or sort of digging through various articles to see what other researchers have, found in the archives, really helped me to be more sort of adaptable and productive and creative in the way that I approached my research. I'll stop there. I've been talking for a long time, but I'm super happy to answer any questions about the process. And I also did want to say I made a chart with all of the sort of fellowships and the deadlines and things that I found when I was going through this process that I'm really happy to share with folks. I'll put my email in the chat and I can send that to people individually. Okay, I'll stop here.
That's fabulous. Thank you. I'm already brimming with questions, and I'm sure people in the audience are brimming with questions. I'll just remind everybody that we will address questions in the chat at the end of everyone's talks. But I'm full of questions. But next I'm going to throw it to Tori. So Tori Schmitt is a PhD candidate in the Department of Art History at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Her dissertation examines the early Gothic architecture and sculpture of the now destroyed Abbey of Saint-Geneviève in Paris. Prior to beginning her doctoral studies, Tori received her MA in 2018 from the Department of Art History and Archaeology at Columbia University in New York, and her BA in Art History and Digital Humanities from UCLA in 2015. Her research has been supported through grants from the Office of the Graduate Dean at UCLA, as well as the UCLA Diane C. Bruyette, not sure if I'm overdoing that, probably, Graduate Fellowship, and thanks to the support of the MAA's Brigitte Baldwin Fellowship in French Medieval History. She currently lives in Paris, where she is completing archival research for her dissertation. So, Tori.
Amazing. Can everyone hear me okay? I've been getting over a cold, so I'm sorry if my voice is a little bit husky, but first off, I want to thank Lauren and Maggie for organizing this panel, and to my co-panelists for sharing their experiences as well. I'm learning a lot, even as a panelist. So it's great. I'm going to take a sip of water. With my intro, I just wanted to talk a bit about my process for applying for the Baldwin. I thought I would share with everyone before we started. So I applied for the Baldwin Fellowship in the fall of 2021. And for those that aren't familiar, it's one of the dissertation fellowships offered by the Medieval Academy of America. I believe it's offered every other year because it can be a 1 or 2 year fellowship. It can be renewed for dissertation research in French medieval history. And I believe that they say that demand sustained archival research in France. So if that sounds like you and you haven't heard about that, add it to your spreadsheet, as Amy and Carolin have mentioned. That's good to have to keep track of these things. Let's see, and I guess the first thing I wanted to note, because when I was thinking about talking today, I was trying to think of what things did I not know when I started applying for these fellowships that I found confusing and opaque. And one of them was knowing when's the time to start doing research, right? Or to start, when do you start applying for these? How much research do you have to have? What are they looking for? So I wanted to signal when I applied in the fall of 2021, it was my second cycle of applying for national grants that allow you to do research abroad to be on fellowship. The first year, I didn't receive a grant, I just applied to them. So it's okay to apply multiple times. I think, like Carolyn said, like that we've all been there. We all apply multiple times. So I applied. It was my second time, second year. And even though it was my second year, because of COVID, I hadn't really started doing any kind of archival research. You know, everything had been limited to Happy Trust and things I could find online. So even at that stage, I was applying with something that was really close to my prospectus. It was a plan for what I would like to do. And I think in a lot of cases, that's okay. That's what they're looking for. They're giving you an award to go do research because you haven't gone and done research yet. So I wouldn't feel so self-conscious if you feel like, oh, I really need to have enough research under my belt before I apply. If you have a solid plan, that is a lot of the times I think what they're looking for specifically for dissertation research fellowships. Let's see. In the process of writing, I guess I'm trying to add to to not repeat advice, because I think there's a lot of good advice that we know that to not repeat what's already been said in the panel, but I would bring in writing groups whenever I've been writing fellowships, sharing them with colleagues, with friends. Exchanging drafts can be really helpful, especially when your friend is not in your exact field. Can be so helpful because I think we get so siloed into our own vocabulary that things can become really opaque, and we have to remember that for the people reading the grants, they might not be specialists in French Gothic architecture, even if it's a medieval grant. You still need to write across disciplines. So I'd really recommend reaching out to your colleagues at your university that might be in a different department that you've met through an event or whatnot, to see if they would be interested in exchanging drafts with you. Right now, where I'm at the end of my grant now. It's been close to 2 years, so I've had the grant for 2 years, so I'm finishing up my grant. I would echo, yes, living abroad to do research. As Lauren mentioned, I'm at UCLA, but I've been living in Paris for the past 2 years. It's its whole own experience. So I guess I would just flag that if you're in the stage of applying, and especially if I didn't live abroad, I'd never lived abroad before I went to do this fellowship. So it was quite an experience. And I think it's good to flag that you're not only signing up for something that's really going to enrich your research and your project and bring you to new conclusions and really help your formation as a scholar, but also it's a whole different life experience that you need to plan for with your visas, living abroad. You may be living in a country where you have academic skills in the language, you can read articles, and that's fine. But I remember the first week that I arrived, the apartment had a massive plumbing problem, and I was not prepared for plumbing vocabulary. So there's going to be things like this that come up. So you're signing up for an experience also where you're going to be enriched and living in a different culture as well, different community, really pushing your language skills to a new level if you haven't lived abroad before. So I think that that's a good thing to signal that you're signing on for something that will change your personal life as well. Let's see. I may leave more for the questions. I'm reading through my notes, and I think that I might leave more for us to bring in, just so that I think we've already heard a lot of really good advice. So I think that we'll see what I can fit in with the individual questions.
Right, thanks, Tori. And I will I'll say this, I guess mostly for Emma's benefit, that I think even if you have repeat advice, it's good to know that that advice is coming from multiple people. Like if everyone is saying you should really be on these listservs, like that's a clue that we should really all be on the listservs, right? So please don't worry about repeating things. You're just sort of strengthening your collective case for why we should all be working on this. All right, so next up we have Emma Snowden. Emma is an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and her research looks at Muslim-Christian relations in medieval Iberia and North Africa. And she received her PhD from the University of Minnesota in 2021. So, welcome, Emma.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for your work organizing this. I do have a few things to repeat. They are listserv related, but yeah, it's been a few years since I had a year-long fellowship during my PhD. My last year of the PhD, 2020, 2021. I had a Mellon Council for European Studies dissertation completion fellowship. It's quite a year in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, I think that fellowship doesn't exist anymore, which is too bad because I think they needed more medievalists, in my opinion. But yeah, I would say in terms of finding funding opportunities, get on the listservs. It can be a little bit of an annoying piece of advice, I think, because of all the emails you get. But it's worth it, not just for funding opportunities, but for calls for papers, for publishing opportunities, for job opportunities, like professional development opportunities. I would say it's worth it. So the Mediterranean seminar is one that I get a lot of emails from, but would say it's well worth it. I would also say I definitely agree with Tori that, you don't have to feel like, you're necessarily at a disadvantage if you haven't had a chance to go to some of these places and work with some of these sources beforehand. But I do think it can help sometimes, both for just your project and for if you're trying to go for the bigger grants. So I would say don't hesitate to try applying for multiple smaller grants to kind of cobble something together for a shorter research trip. That's something I was able to do in the year before my year-long fellowship. So, little things from my department, from my university, from my grad school, from the Medieval Academy. And a lot of them don't have any rules about, sort of combining things because they understand that, $1,500 here, $2,000 here, amazing, but not necessarily going to get you overseas for a good period of time. And so I was able to go for a couple months, work with manuscripts in different libraries, and I do think it can help, just sort of situating your project. And it can also be nice if you don't have time to go abroad for a whole year, which again, not everyone's living situation does allow for that. So would encourage that. One of the questions we were asked to consider addressing was how we balance, writing application materials with research and teaching and, writing the actual project. And I'll be really honest, I don't know if I've struck that balance yet. It's something I struggle with a lot, but I will say that I find writing grant applications to be really helpful for figuring out how to frame my research most clearly and most concisely. And I think there are a lot of connections between grant applications and like abstracts, introductory chapters, cover letters for job applications. It's actually like a very similar genre, the cover letter in particular, I would say. So don't feel like, I mean, it can be really overwhelming the amount of time you spend perfecting these things, but I do think it's useful in other areas as well. Would definitely echo the advice to get as many eyes on your application materials as possible. And in addition to like a mix of people in your field and outside of your field, I'd also say if you can get a mix of people who are willing to give you like really detailed micro level, like line by line edits, like your English PhD friends, for example, and like people who are going to give you the more macro level, big picture framing advice. I think they're both important, and together they can make for really tight, really polished proposals. And yeah, reading other people's too and giving them the same advice, great way to, give it back and also like get ideas for how to sort of approach your own things. And then in terms of, the fellowship year itself, as everyone said, accountability is important, sort of community and companionship are important. I was staying in the same city that I lived in for my PhD for my fellowship year, but it was early COVID, so it sort of felt like I was abroad in a new place and didn't know anyone in a number of ways. And the saving grace for me was I had a friend also in Minneapolis, and we started meeting over Zoom together in the mornings. And we would play these like YouTube Pomodoro videos. So we would do like 2-hour work sessions at a time with 25 minutes of working and then 5 minutes of break. And that gave us a really great structure. And of course, companionship. And we would start really early before her kids woke up, which was good for me because I need to like hit the ground running right away, or I will find a million reasons not to get started on any given day. And it was really good. We actually still do that now. We meet several times a week in the morning. So if you can find someone whose schedule matches up with your own enough for that, I would really encourage it. I think there are even apps where you can agree to do that kind of thing with just random people. I heard of one recently. I don't remember the name, but I could look into it if anyone's interested. And I would say for me, the day-to-day was even more important than sort of the broader timeline of when am I going to finish this chapter, when am I going to revise that one, but just making sure that I knew I was going to get started every day, work a certain amount of hours, shoot for a certain word count. Everything else kind of fell into place after that. So those are some of my thoughts, and happy to talk with everyone now.
Thanks, Emma. I'm so delighted with this too, because I actually a year ago organized a sort of grant writing workshop internally to my French department at UVA, and so much of the same advice is popping up again here. And I attended a virtual workshop that was based on UK funding sources. It was a virtual workshop that I attended last week, and a lot of the same things were popping up there. Keep your ear to the ground, looking out for opportunities wherever they may be. Reaching out to others and setting strong timelines and getting many eyes in your applications, like you just said, Emma. So I guess it's nice to see this sort of advice reinforced. This may be kind of silly, but we did get an early question in the chat. I know we're saving chat questions for a little bit later, but it was on what sort of mailing lists we like. So I wonder if we could all sort of maybe just just name what mailing lists we're into and what we use. Personally, as a French scholar, I use Francophile, which I'm just gonna put in the chat, which it's a very common one for people who do French, and kind of the running joke is that every morning you launch your inbox and you have to delete like 10 Francophile emails because there's very many emails, but there are many sources on there as well. And then of course the MAA's newsletter is a great place to see information about funding sources through the MAA. But what other sources do you guys use? What about UKRI? I just heard about this one. It's like in the UK. Do UK folks use this? No? I don't know. I just heard of this recently.
Really? So for German funding sources, it would be Haushaltscode, which lists major funding streams for medieval history at least. And there are also 2 for art history, which I would just drop into the chat box.
And then, I mean, I think what also is helpful too is to look for the sources that are more immediately available to you. So looking at what funding your university offers as well. So not just within your own department, but your larger graduate school likely has funding sources available to all graduate students. And so I think that's a great place to look as well.
If you have like a center for, medieval or early modern studies or something, they probably have a newsletter. I know. So I work at our Center for Pre-Modern Studies. We have a bi-weekly newsletter that I put together that is like all the funding listservs that we're on, we compile and then send things out. So that's like an easy, local, relevant one if you are looking for that. And then it includes all of our university funding as well. Just convenient.
I used to have that exact same job, actually. And I was just going to say Centers for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, but I would say even if it's not at your university, you could probably get on there. Like Tennessee has one as well, very similar. So some of them aren't going to be relevant, the university ones, but they include a lot of other opportunities as well. So I think that's a great idea.
Or also, I'm thinking now, if there's a collection that has material you're interested in consulting, say, for example, I had some manuscripts I wanted to consult at the Fitzwilliam in the UK, and they have their own travel grant for anyone. You don't have to be based in the UK. So it can be important to look directly at the archives that you're interested in consulting and see if they offer funding to attract people to come look at their collections, because that exists as well. But I know we meant to start with questions internal to us in the panel. I have many questions, but one of the ones I sort of pre-wrote is maybe a bit contrary to the purpose of this conversation, but I think it's a useful thinking exercise. So I was wondering what was the sort of plan B, or maybe what would you have done had you not been able to secure these funding sources that you gained? I think Amy, you said something really great about when the unexpected happens, if you have some kind of health problem, or I've been affected by the cyber attack at the British Library as well, what do you do? What workarounds do you find to still do the work that you want to do, even if you haven't gotten all the resources that you're hoping for? So I suppose just broadly to everybody, what was backup? What did you think you might do if not be a winner?
Again, some of this I think can be specific to whatever institution you're at, but I felt really lucky at the University of Minnesota. There were a lot of different job opportunities for grad students, aside from just like TAing or being a reader grader. And so this also takes a lot of time, which is kind of the caveat. But throughout my program, I took a lot of jobs like what Maggie was just talking about, working for our Center for Pre-Modern Studies, which is a little more of an office events management type job, but really useful in a lot of ways. We were and still are housing the Church History Journal. And so I was able to work a couple different jobs for the journal, including as like an assistant to the editors, which was a really invaluable experience in terms of like learning about how the sausage is made in terms of journal publishing and understanding why it's a very slow process. But so those kinds of things made me feel a little more confident that even if I couldn't get a TA position at some point and my, funding was getting cut off in terms of that, I had other experiences working for the university and places that could potentially continue to offer me funding even when I was like outside of my guaranteed band. Of course, that's not the same as a fellowship year. Of course, if I'd been doing that, I think I would have needed an additional year to finish. So it's not perfect, but I think there's a lot to be said for taking these other opportunities if they're available and if you're interested. And that also made me feel like if I, was on the job market afterwards, I would have some other maybe more marketable skills. And I mean, I know that's a whole other conversation, but I found it helpful.
I mean, I was advised not to bet just on one opportunity, but to have different grants open during the process. So, for example, currently I hold a scholarship provided by the German government, who, and before Brexit, still funded PhDs in the UK. No, they don't anymore, but that's a different story. But in the moment I will pass my viva, my funding will be cut off. So I always knew, like, when I completed my DPhil, this would be the time when my funding would be running off. So I was actually applying to several postdoc fellowships during the past year. And from my experience, what's very beneficial to know is that all these different postdoc positions within different countries, these grants have different kind of rules. So for example, the UK fellowships, at least at the University of Oxford, the grant applications are very, very short, sometimes only 2 pages. So it's more like preliminary vision of what you could do if you had the means to do that. If, for example, you apply outside Oxford or Cambridge, it's more like you should have 3 to 6 months in order to prepare the grant writing. The application to the British Academy, for example, was a lot of work and took me at least 4 to 5 months to complete. And they expected to present a very long grant text, which already outlined the major steps of the project, the outcome, the methodology. So you had to have everything planned out already. For German institutions, for example, I would recommend like 6 months plus, because, for example, the DFG, one of our major funding bodies, they expect you to submit at least 20 pages with a lined out project. So you really need to know what you're going to do. And in German institutions, it's more like you already should have done the research and then write the application and not try to research on the grant itself. That's not going to work. So you see there's a complete set of different rules in each academic system, and also within one academic landscape, like rules can vary from institution to institution. So my rule would be to know to what grant line you're applying and what the rules are, and make a timeline for yourself when you need to complete what step. And this takes a lot of time and nerves. And of course, you always have to consider rejection. So that's part of the game, I guess.
I think this kind of echoes what's already been said, but I'll say it anyway. I also took some like copy editing type of jobs, like other additional means of support, especially as I was waiting to see if I, caught any line for a fellowship. I think it's really good advice, Carolyn, to like not just be locked in and honed in on expecting one to work out. Casting a wide net, I think is really, really important. And I can sort of just attest to like having these additional, like the copy editing and the like, I taught additional classes at, other institutions and things like that in composition. So not in medieval studies, but sort of like a different field. That was really useful for me as I went on the job market, because it helped me sort of talk about like, what additional skills can I use as a means to teach really complex information to students in like a basic, simple way? How can I like work across disciplines and teach students outside of my field? And I think that was really helpful in terms of just being able to like sell myself and pitch my skills. And of course, also as I was considering like, what happens if I didn't get a job while on the job market? And this is a different conversation too, but, shifting to ALTAC, like what other sort of skills did I develop? Even just like in grant writing, right? How can I sort of sell a project and get funds secured for an institution, whatever that might be? I think that was, actually, it might have been really stressful and made me feel like I was scrambling for a long time, but I think in the long run, it helped in a lot of ways.
I mean, maybe to add on one more point, know about the success rates of the grant streams or positions you're applying to. For example, the highly praised and prestigious Oxford Junior Research Fellowships have 1,000 applicants per position. So the success rate is very, very limited, and the competition is so high that, chances are limited. You can get it, but it's very tough. So if you know that, you should maybe not put all your efforts into this one application. There are other success rates. For example, the British Academy recently has a 10% success rate, whereas the major funding streams in Germany are a bit better off with around 20% success rate.
I just wanted to add a little bit, echoing everything that's been said. With applying for fellowships, it's so hard to balance that you really need to cast a wide net while still being really attentive to the fact that you need to submit a good individual application each time. Right? There's different requirements for everything, so it's pretty rare that you can just change the name of the fellowship application and resubmit. That you're going to have to restructure based on length and what the grant's looking for. But I guess as a word of reassurance, if you're in the position of you're applying for a dissertation fellowship and you don't get it, since I've been in that position, I guess I would advise to be prepared that if you can't get to your primary sources, that it might be there's ways to shift. Like, okay, maybe you're going to work on your introduction for the next couple months. You're going to do a lot of secondary source research. I think it can also be helpful to be aware of what local resources are available to you, because you never know what scholars might have taken pictures of things, or if, for example, if you're in California, the Getty Research Institute is really great and they have so much stuff. And if you can't get to Europe, you might be able to get to the Getty. So I would recommend, looking at don't be discouraged if you don't get the big grant. There's smaller grants to get you to other places that can also move your project forward.
Here's something I've been thinking about too, and I think this came up in several of the panelists' talks, was thinking about how you can support your colleagues as well in this process, because we're all sort of doing this together. And I can't remember who said this, maybe multiple people said this, but I agree that it's great to have readers who are outside of your immediate field, perhaps adjacent to your field, so you can be thinking about writing towards a more generalist audience. But also I was thinking about, I mean, and this is the sort of advice that I like to give other people, is that I think it's important to share resources as well. So if you say find out about a fund that you don't think works for you, but you know someone who would be perfect for, then share that forward. That's sort of passing it forward energy, I think, is what helps everybody in all of our medieval disciplines. And so personally, that's just something that I like to do, is whenever I come across any funding source, I think about, well, that doesn't work for me, but who do I know that would work for? And then I try to target someone that I know and say, hey, I think you ought to go for this. And then in that sense, it's kind of how you build your community as well, because then that person will remember you as well, and you can work together on future projects. So I guess that's more of advice than questions, but does that resonate with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it fosters a community where if one of us succeeds, then we all kind of succeed. And I think that's important as the future of medieval studies becomes kind of questionable in some ways. So no, I think that's just a general ethos.
And I think you really only learn when you're willing to share your resources and also work together on grant application as far as this is possible. For example, without the help of my colleagues, friends, and also supervisors, I wouldn't have improved my grant writing skills. And especially my supervisor was sometimes really harsh on me, saying like, you cannot do this. And this especially was concerned with writing a really strong first paragraph, starting with a very concrete example, something people can relate to, but don't get into writing entire pages on this example. Be precise and concrete. And then very early on in the research grant you write, give an idea what you actually want to work on, not hold it back to the very last minute and try to make it a big reveal in the end, but make it very, very prominent at the beginning, what you want to research on and why this is important, and don't hold this back. And again, be precise and concrete as much as you can. Name individual institutions you want to work with, name individual people you already sought advice of, or give names of journals you want to publish in, book series. So really make this a tangible project and not something which is very vague in your mind, but make it as concrete as possible. And this I had to learn the very hard way, sending drafts to anyone and they get back to me and say like, oh, you have to really put more effort and more work into this. And now it gets to a point where you know what you have to do and you feel like you're more you feel like more confident in your writing skill, if that makes sense. But that's only possible in a group of scholars who support each other.
And going off that a little bit, so I know I had the opportunity to sit on some grant review committees where, so like people were applying for funds and you'd read through them and then pick them. And that was really helpful for me because I felt like I got a good sense of that, like, oh, you really have to get to the point because these people, like I had a stack of 10 grants and I was like, oh, I forgot to do these. It's the day before they're due. I just have to get through them like really quickly. So I don't know, does anybody else have experience? Like, have you ever read grants for something? And then do you feel like, is that an opportunity that was worth the time? Because I know so much of our, like, we have a lot of, well, you can do almost anything you want with all of your time, but you kind of need to make it count. But I know for me, I think reviewing grants made me feel more confident in writing them. And is that something that you guys have experienced as well?
Yes, actually, I've had this a couple of times, and I think it gives you a very strong sense of do's and don'ts, and then what sticks out in applications, and which helps you write your own as well. But also, I somewhat by chance got to have that experience here in France, and that was just interesting to sit on a committee in a different cultural setting because it let me see what different countries are looking for essentially in their applications. And so that was interesting in itself. And it also was yet another opportunity to meet new colleagues and collaborate with other colleagues and establish more relationships. But yeah, it can be hard to seek out those opportunities to be someone who's reviewing grants as a graduate student, but they do come around. And I agree with you, Maggie. That's a really great point to seek those out. Anybody else?
So ours is, we have a thing called the Council of Graduate Students, which Emma probably knows because we're both in Minnesota. But so it's like all internal. So all the graduate students apply for these Council of Graduate Students grants, and they're small, and there's a lot of applications for them. But the result is, yeah. So like if you have any kind of like graduate student group type thing like that on your campus, if you're a large university, you might have an opportunity like that, which I started doing and was like, oh, this is actually like now I know what budgets are supposed to look like. And now I know why it's important that you use letterhead on something. And now I know why they say limit this to however many words. So, but yeah, so I mean, that was an on-campus opportunity. So you may have things that pop up, or like being a grad student rep in your department, if there's anything like that.
I think that's such a great tip. And I would also add for writing groups, I've done this with writing groups before where you have to speed read everyone's application, where you have your little egg timer and you get like 2 minutes to read it. And it's brutal, but it's really helpful to get what people got from your grant, your precious grant that you've spent so long writing, and the minute and 30 seconds what their takeaways were can be really, really helpful. And also, it's a short time commitment, so you can get more eyes on it too.
I didn't decide on grants, but I'm part of the Oxford Admissions Committee. So I decide on students' admissions, undergrad admissions. And from this work, I actually learned that sometimes it's not only the performance of the candidate in the interviews, but it's also sometimes down to purely political reasons within one college or the university. You have limited resources, in this case, limited places for undergrad students, and you just have to decide on the basis of the places available, which students get admit and who gets actually rejected. And sometimes the difference between one candidate and another is very, very slim, and you cannot precisely pinpointed down to one specific reason. And from this experience, I learned that also in the process of grant writing and grant rejection, sometimes it's out of my control and maybe come down to other reasons why a specific grant was rejected. For example, I was secondary proposer to a network grant, which is funded by COST, which is a huge EU initiative. And we are currently trying for the third time to successfully apply to this grant scheme. And I was always feeling very bad about this because I wrote the grant together with 2 other senior scholars, and we put in at least a year of research into it. And the reasons why we were rejected differed from time to time. So it was always another issue. And then we contacted other successful applicants to this funding stream, and they all said, like, we only got it in the 3rd time. So maybe 3 times is the lucky number, but sometimes there are also other reasons, especially when you're competing against the sciences or social sciences, for example.
I actually just recently became aware of a grant as well that I can't remember the name, but I'm sure I could find it. But it's based in the UK, and there's a grant that because every year they consistently receive such strong applications, they've decided now that essentially if all of the applications meet a given standard and then they select their best pool from there, then they're instituting essentially a lottery. They're selecting the recipients randomly because they're all so strong, and they wanted to try to remove any sort of subjectivity or bias as much as possible. So it's absolutely right. Occasionally these things are out of your control and you could make the best application possible, but it's good to cast a wide net. We have about 25-ish minutes left. We're planning on going to about time zone difference, 2:30, I suppose, in the Eastern time zone. So I think it'd be great to encourage people to put questions in the chat. So any attendees, please throw them at us. We'll continue obviously having our own internal conversation and chat, but please do put your questions in the chat for us to address.
So I have an additional question, sort of brought up by what Carolyn was talking about. When it comes to talking to people who have received grants that you're applying for, or like talking to people who are applying for them, and I don't mean to put you guys on the spot and like make you answer this, but how can you say a little bit about how helpful or not helpful it is, or if you were able to talk to other people who had gotten your grant, or like if you in the future would be willing to talk to people about grants you've gotten in the past, or just sort of your take on that, like, basic, do you think it's useful to reach out? So I think it is useful, but do you guys think it's useful to reach out to people who have already held a fellowship or a grant that you're trying to apply for?
So in this specific instance with the COST application, we did reach out to other people and we also got an answer. And these people were very helpful in the way that they shared with us the feedback they received on their proposal. So we could kind of anticipate what the reviewers would look for and what they might criticize about our draft application. But in the end, the feedback we received pointed out completely different areas where they thought we were lacking. And in this specific case, which was really weird, that we scored really highly in all the categories. So you can achieve 5 points in each category, and we received 4 in every category, so quite high. But they just have a fixed number of grants. So if you are not as good as other grants, especially from the sciences, you won't get it. In terms of fellowship applications, I'm always eager to share my grants, so I'm not holding back, especially with my own students, because how should they otherwise learn how to write this? I think it's a very specific genre, at least, for example, when it comes to Germany, where you have also very fixed vocabulary and phrases, what to use. But I always feel that grants also have a very personal side of how to write them, and you can definitely see what kind of academic it is, or what kind of scholar, what drives them, how they write, what emphasis they put on certain things. So I think up to a specific limit, yes, it's helpful, but there should be still something unique to you and how you approach a specific topic or grant writing itself, if that makes any sense. I'm eager to know what the others think about though.
Yeah, I would say that other grad students are always one of my best resources and sources of mentorship. When I was in my PhD program, the year-long fellowship that I got because I asked someone who was further along in the program. I was like, hey, I remember you had a fellowship year. What fellowship was that? And then she shared her application materials with me. And anytime someone's asked for my application materials, I've always shared them. I mean, I guess it's always been people I've known, but I've always felt really happy to sort of pay that forward. And I would say, honestly, some of the pieces of the application materials that I found most helpful to look at other people's is honestly the things like the timeline, the budget, the stuff that just feels a little more technical, and I'm just like, I don't know how much detail to go into. So yeah, I found it really helpful.
I'll just sort of echo that looking at examples and models was like the number one thing that helped me with my grant writing, and even like job application materials too. Having many models to just sort of see like, okay, these are successful applications. What did they do well? Really, I do understand what you're saying, Carolyn, and like it can sort of skew perhaps how you might approach it and make you feel like, oh, I can't add my own sort of flair in this particular way. But I do think the genre like necessarily calls for a kind of like, unfortunately, like a rigid structure and kind of approach to securing funding. So it definitely was helpful in my experience. There aren't examples, which maybe I will chat with the MAA committee to get examples for the Schleck. They don't specifically have like examples on the website, but I was able to reach out to, like you were talking about, Emma, colleagues and other graduate students who are way further along, you know, and ask like, hey, I know you got this really prestigious fellowship, like, what was that? And can you please share your materials? So I'm also really happy to like share any and all stuff that I have, because I feel like, as we mentioned before, it's kind of the only way we can thrive is by having that sort of community and shared resources.
I echo the sentiment. And if you're shy, just push through the shyness. Ask a graduate student in your program, ask a friend. You never know who people know. You know, you may look on the website and be like, I don't know who's gotten this fellowship before. I don't know anyone who's applied. You never know how you're gonna, you know, find someone that's very happy to talk to you about their application process or even share their application with you.
I think graduate program coordinators, or like whoever in your department sort of does like not like necessarily admin stuff exactly, but the ones who kind of know what everyone's working on and know who's getting which funding and know like the nuts and bolts of how people are moving through the program. Those can be really helpful resources because you can say like, do you know if anyone has ever done X? Or I'm interested in this summer school. Do you have any suggestions on how to make something like that happen? Because those like the people that are like academic adjacent often have really good input and just a lot of knowledge that we don't always tap into because we're like, oh, we should go to our advisor. But you know, the advisor doesn't know what every student is doing all the time. So we also have a couple questions in the chat, it looks like. So I'm going to go up to Rebecca Hart, who says or asks, any advice on grants and grant finding when you're still trying to settle on a dissertation topic?
I have an initial response to that. I would say, Rebecca, if you are just starting to settle on your topic, I would look at the smaller grants from your university, from the Medieval Pre-Modern Center, from different departments. Look for those small summer grants, because I feel like in a lot of cases, they're very open to reading a grant that says, well, I'm, you know, thinking about these several topics and going to see some stuff would be really helpful for me at wherever place you would go to see it. And then on top of that, it would also really help you kind of figure out, well, how do you feel about this material? Would you like to work on this for a long-term project? So I would say look for getting those smaller grants. I applied for a smaller travel grant in the beginning, and that trip really helped me focus on my topic. I would recommend that.
I completely
I'm
agree with
not
Tori too. Oh, sorry. I had a very similar experience as well, in that I was able to do some smaller exploratory research with a small summer grant from my university. And that also, in addition to giving me just the ability to look at materials that I could consider and explore more, it gave me the confidence to seek out larger opportunities after that as well. So I think it's a great way to sort of snowball your confidence if you start smaller and then build from there. And it sorts of builds up your experiences that you can point to when you're trying to go to these larger institutions. You know, you can say, oh yes, I do have some experience doing this already at this, you know, other maybe a smaller example, but then it demonstrates that you know what you're doing, and then you can feel like you know what you're doing. So starting small, I completely agree with Tori.
Or even if you think of it not as like getting general funding, but if you're getting something specific, like if you say, oh, I really need to know this language, so I'm going to find a summer school that's teaching this language, and then I'm going to apply for funding to do the summer school, because that's a very straightforward, like, I'm doing this thing, it has this clear benefit, this is why I need to do it. You know, you don't need your whole dissertation fleshed out at that point, but you'll like get progress on that, and you'll start getting experience in the like weird persuasive genre of applicationing, which, you know, grant writing is kind of a subset of.
And there are also some like shorter like summer opportunities for like paleography and codicology and stuff. And then, you know, like at Himmel in Minnesota, or like I went to one that was 2 weeks in Leiden for like an Islamic manuscripts workshop, which was great because they have so many manuscripts there. And so you learn a little bit about how to work with them, and then you like have access to their special collections and their library. And that can be a great like sort of low stakes intro, I think. And oftentimes you can find funding for all or part of those things.
at least in Germany and partly also in Switzerland and Austria, something exists which is specifically designed to help you to develop a DPhil or a doctoral project. So these are usually fellowships for people who just completed their master's degree and would typically run between 9 months to 12 months, and just to let you write the grant for your doctoral project. I'm not quite sure whether this also exists in the US, but it's very helpful if you intend to apply for major funding streams and also need help developing your grant writing skills, because they mostly also grant you access to the institution based at this university to help you writing the grant.
This might
Yeah,
be
I
such.
think,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maggie.
oh, I was just gonna add, I think our university sometimes has things like that, like for when you're in like your first or second year of your program, or like summer funding, like to work with a professor on like a small research project or something. So there are like kind of like back ways in, but I think institution specific might be the first place you'd want to look and just see like what your department can do to support you, or your college, or your, you know, grad college, College of Liberal Arts, wherever you sort of fit into your university. But sorry, go ahead, Amy.
I think that's really good advice, like starting at the institutional level and then moving sort of outwards. This might seem like I'm like a walking ad for MAA. But they're really, MAA is.
You're in the right place for it.
Yeah, MAA has been so phenomenal. But I just recently got to do a podcast with a colleague of mine for the Multicultural Middle Ages podcast. And although I'm like at the end of my dissertation and finishing up, you know, and have like my research questions, you know, not fully fleshed out, but to some degree, I feel like that experience, getting to chat with a colleague about a topic and really like fleshing that out, and, you know, going through the application process of pinning down like what is your episode, and what are you going to talk about, what methods are you using, how are you going to sort of explain that to an audience potentially who are, you know, specialists and non-specialists. Like that experience I feel like as an earlier grad student would have been really helpful for me in materializing like, oh, this is what I want to sort of pursue perhaps as a dissertation topic. So that might be like a more like less grant oriented, but still the application process and writing the script and getting to actually like have a conversation with a colleague and then a sort of specialist was really helpful for me also in refining my own thoughts, even though I'm at the end of that sort of process.
That somewhat leads into Will has a question in the chat as well about how he says, can you share your thoughts on how the process of grant application writing itself has or has not helped your research? And so I think we've highlighted a lot in this conversation how there's really a lot of overlaps. It's applying for these sorts of things is not wholly separate from the work you do researching and even teaching. So could we continue this chat some more, I suppose, on how it has or has not informed your research, or there's certain ways that maybe it's shown you what you don't want to pursue, perhaps, or leave that to anybody.
I'll just say quickly, I think how it doesn't help research is kind of an interesting question. And I think it loops back to someone was talking earlier about trying to find a good fit for your project. And so I think one of the ways it might not be helpful is if you're almost casting too broad of a net and you're trying to be like, how can I make my research fit into this description? Because ultimately, anytime you're doing a grant application, 90% of what you're doing is like organizing your own thoughts about your project. And then maybe like the other 10% is highlighting which aspects of it are in line with the grant. But if you try to go so far as to like change your research to fit a grant that you're probably not going to get, I think that can be detrimental because you're trying to sort of play the system then and be like, what do they want to hear? And that's not necessarily what you actually want to be doing.
I think also earlier someone mentioned struggling with knowing when to start with research and start with writing. And I think sometimes when you're in a cycle of like applications, whether for grants or jobs or both, it can start to feel like a little bit of an echo chamber of your plans, your grand ideas. And it can start to feel like, when am I going to realize this? Is it realizable? So I think some of that just comes with the territory, but it's something I struggle with. I think, sort of like the claims that I'm making to try and make a living, versus like, when do I actually get the time to sit down and like follow up? And yeah.
I think those are both such great points, Maggie, we need to cast a wide net, but sometimes it can be really unproductive to spend a month making your project fit into something that you didn't really want it to go in that direction anyway. I think we've all done that at some point, or we will, and it can be frustrating and not the most productive. And I agree also, Emma, to follow up on your point that sometimes grant writing can feel all consuming. And you're just writing these plans. It's like, when am I actually going to get the time to research? And I guess I would say to people that are at the beginning, or you're just getting started with writing grants as a graduate student, that it can be important to kind of keep your expectations in check. Someone had told this to me when I did my first major grant cycle, when I applied to, I don't know, 5 big grants and that fall rush when they're all due. And it's a lot, and you really need to reduce your expectations for how much you're going to get done on your actual dissertation while you're doing that, or balance it with like, oh, what do I need to do to teach and show up to teach and all my other commitments as a human. So I think it's good to remember when you're going into a grant application cycle and you have 3 to 5 or how many deadlines on your calendar, to be like, okay, this might not be the most productive season for my project, and that's okay because I'm pushing it forward by getting funding. But I think if you make a lot of, for me, I found when I make a lot of project goals, it can be really disappointing to be like, I'm just writing about my plans and not progressing, but it's kind of a necessary evil, right? You got to write the grants.
That actually kind of makes me think of another question I had. We've spent a lot of time in this conversation, which, helpfully, I think, talking about strategies for applying and writing for and getting these things. But I was wondering if I could hear more from you all about that, after you've acquired a funding resource. So if you could reflect on, what was it like during your fellowship year, or maybe unexpected experiences you had, like Amy, you mentioned a health issue, or how did this affect your relationship with your home institution if you had to go to a different institution for a little while? So I'd like to hear more from all of you guys about just during the funding period, like how did it change your work and your professional development?
I think for me, one thing that it really actually helped me realize was how much I love teaching, because I didn't get to teach. And that was a really, not that I didn't think I loved it before, but it just really solidified for me. I feel more teaching oriented. I love the research as well, but not getting to be in the classroom with students to hear their insights and to just see them think and have such brilliant, creative interpretations was like an experience I did not realize I would miss so much. And I think it also impacted kind of in a negative way, like when I went for, I keep bringing it back to the job application process, I'm sorry, but I just went through it, so it feels so fresh on my mind. Having to do teaching demonstrations, I hadn't been teaching, so I felt really rusty, and I didn't really have those skills at the forefront. So I guess that was one. I don't know if that gets to your question, Lauren, but I guess maybe an unexpected sort of circumstance or thing that also accompanied getting the grant was actually realizing, oh, I love teaching and I miss it.
Yeah, I actually feel very similar. And anytime I'm teaching, I want to put all my time into that because I do enjoy it more and find it more rewarding in a lot of ways. Something a little, I don't know, unexpected might not be the best word, but I would say sometimes some of these year-long fellowships come with other obligations that are attached to the funding. And they'll say that, in the call for applications. So it's not like you don't know. But sometimes they can end up taking more time than you might anticipate or might want. I think sometimes they're well-meaning, but you might have to participate in a conference for the society that's giving you part of the funding. You might have to solicit submissions for their journal, for example. So there can be things like that. So I think it's good to build that into your overall timeline of how much you think you're going to be able to do during the year. They might still be making some other demands on your time. So, which is fair. It's a lot of money, but it can be frustrating too.
I just want to step in really quick and say that one thing fellowship time can do is show you that you actually don't like teaching too, because I personally was like, oh my God, my anxiety is so much lower now that I'm not teaching. So for me, it was sort of the opposite. I was like, oh, I don't want a teaching career. So I was like, okay, now we're going to look at some non-academic things. Cause I so it can also go both ways. And I just like to reiterate that, because I know most people in academia are teaching oriented. And I feel strongly that you don't have to go into teaching, to still be a graduate student and to have a reason to get a PhD. So just a side note, but the fellowship experience can kind of reveal a lot about how you actually want to be spending your time.
Absolutely. And I think, Maggie, that shows that no matter what stage of your grad career you're in, there's still time to be exploratory and find out more things about what you want and what you don't want. And I agree. I miss teaching personally. So, but yes, I think it's very helpful for that, which is not directly related to our dissertation research, but it's definitely related to our work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it can be a surprising thing to discover that you're like, oh, this maybe is not my career path. What am I doing on this fellowship now? Oh no, what's happening? And then there's just crisis, but it's going to be okay.
And there's room for small crises too, and small bumps in the road. I know that so I'm on fellowship currently this year as well, and it took me a month to get internet, and so that's the sort of thing that that delayed me a bit, and those are the sorts of things that you you can plan as much as possible, but there's some things that you just can't plan for either. See, I think we need to start wrapping up. Unfortunately, we'd planned to do about 90 minutes, and we're coming up on an hour and a half now. So if there are any last thoughts or last questions anyone has in the chat or among us, I very much enjoyed this. I don't know about you guys. This was lovely.
Yes, it was a nice interlude in the day.
Thank you. Thank you for having us and inviting us to have this conversation together.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, and thank you everyone for coming. And I will, since I know we can't all clap at the same time from the audience, I will clap for all of us. Yay! Thank you, panelists.
And I'd like to thank you so much to Chris, who helped us set everything up technically that made this possible. Thank you so much, Chris, for setting this up for us. I suppose maybe right before our panelists, before we leave, if you feel comfortable sharing perhaps your email in the chat as well, if anyone wants to reach out to any of us, I'll share mine as well. This was actually our final graduate student committee workshop of the academic year. But the generous MAA has funded us to do such workshops for the next 2 years. So also I'd like to give a shout out, I suppose, to anyone attending tonight. If you found this helpful, or today, this afternoon, whatever time it is where you are. If you found this helpful, and if perhaps there are other topics that you would like the GSC to discuss, don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we love to put on events that graduate students find helpful and supportive. So please do contact us with anything you'd like to see in the future. One more thank you to our panelists, and I think we can wrap up. Anyway, thank you.
That was great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.